Good afternoon. My name is Richard Velez, and I'm the chairperson for the Energy Advisory Committee for the town of Lakeville. Today's meeting will be recorded by Lakecam, so if folks would like to watch it after the fact, they can. With respect to the rules and regulations by which we're doing this via Zoom, this is in accordance with the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, subsection 20, relating to the 2020 novel coronavirus outbreak emergency and the November 19th, 2020 public meeting of the Energy Advisory Board, or committee, I should say. It shall be physically closed to the public to avoid group congregation. However, to view this meeting in progress, please go to facebook.com/Lakecam. You do not need a Facebook account to view this meeting. This meeting will be recorded again and available to be viewed at a later date at http://www.lakecam.tv/ and that should get you there. So, having said that, let me ask for everyone to identify themselves as to who's present. Joseph?
Joseph Chamberlain, present.
Jim Kenny, present.
Don Foster, present.
Ryan Day, present.
Nathan Darling.
Yes. Nathan is on the phone as he's out on doing field work. So I think we've got all of the particulars out of the way. We can move on to our agenda. We're going to be looking at old business first, and a couple of items there, which is to get an update on our current town facilities and use of energy and any performance issues. And then we'll move on to the status of any future grants for the town to be able to apply for. So I guess Mr. Kenny would be the one to start us off.
Okay, now the things I have would probably be just a sort of a status on where we are for the annual report for the green communities. I have a few things on that. And then interestingly enough, the annual report was due a whole month earlier this year than in past years. So rather than the early December, it was due in early November. And then just Tuesday, Nate's well aware of this. We've got, there's a review that goes on, sponsored by DOER. Basically, they have contracted auditors that look through the reports, and we have our audit report back, and there are a few discrepancies. That's not unusual, but there's some things we have to answer to. So I can speak briefly to that. There's been quite a bit of discussion already between Nate, Brian, and myself on how to proceed in a couple of these areas. So I've got some, I'm going to do some share screen. I'm going to show two pieces from the annual report. So the first one, I guess I got to double click. Does everybody see this table?
Yep.
Okay, I guess Nate, you can't, but what I'm showing is it's called Table 2 in the annual report, and it's what I call the report card. It's basically shows how many MMBTUs how many energy units we use for each of the major areas in town, buildings and vehicles and so on. For the most recent year, the 2020, that's column G. If you can see my cursor, I'm showing that. The first column, column D, is 2011. That was our baseline year. And we've gone enough years that we don't show the intermediate ones, just the last three. So we can have a comparison of 2020 with the two most recent years. And I'm not going to go through a lot of detail on all of it, but the thing to note probably is the percentages in the gray area over on the right. And there's also a couple of interesting things that are on here. One is that we have an adjustment for the police station because that's really our first what's called building stock adjustment that's occurred as a green community. So if there's a major addition or a whole new building, there's a way of tracking that. And actually we get a benefit from that. I can talk briefly about that. And then they go through the weather normalizing that they do, they meaning it's an algorithm that the DOER folks have, which I don't really like. And I've raised some concerns, but you know, doesn't really, they're not going to change the results. So if you look at 2020, you know, buildings, if you compare it with all the way back to 2011, we're down 14% in the building consumption of power. This is an all-in MMBTUs. It's electrical and it's fuel. Okay. And the interesting thing is that includes the actually higher level of energy overall that the police station consumes compared to the former site. But on a per square foot basis, as we talked about at the last meeting, it's quite a bit lower. So that's down, and then down around 16% is the vehicles. We just weren't driving as much this year, and it was a better, less troublesome winter for snow and so on. And then this building stock adjustment, this -5. So a big number is bad, so to speak, in terms of energy consumption. So when you can subtract it off, that means you get a benefit from it. So the fact that the building is, it's basically a larger building, a building that's more necessary, you know, for today's world. You don't get penalized. In fact, we get credit for having a much better efficiency in terms of per square foot basis. So the total for the year, which includes the building stock change adjustment, and it's not weather normalized, it's not at this point, is an 18% improvement over the baseline year. And it's a little bit better than 2019 and quite a bit better than 2018. If you look at those numbers across the middle. And then we go into weather normalizing. And what happens is for 2020, the number goes up a little bit. So what that's saying is that compared to some nominal year out there, we were actually, by these numbers, which again, I don't agree with, but by these numbers, we were a little bit warmer. The environment was a little bit warmer. So we have to sort of add back MMBTUs to normalize for it. Not a big effect, okay? But if you look at the baseline year, they were at 17,756, and they got normalized even more.
Mhm.
So on a weather normalized basis, there we are very close to our 20%, and then they had to kind of add back in the building stock change adjustment.
Mhm.
So again, a lot of numbers, but this is what gets looked at closely. The town's doing well. And so it's a good overall report from just total energy consumption. All right.
So Jim, if we could go back for a second, you mentioned that the building stock change adjustment was beneficial to us. How is it beneficial to us?
Well, it's beneficial because the energy density, the amount of energy used on a per square foot basis, basically, Rick, I mean, the DOER has said, look, we're really interested in how you're doing on a per square foot basis. And if you build a new facility, then let's take a look at that. And in our case, we were much more efficient. So we actually get credit for it.
And does that credit show up in grant availability or some kind of funding?
Well, we've actually gone, we actually met the overall criteria of 20%, or the goal of 20% after 5 years, 3 or 4 years ago. And beyond that, there's really no, that I'm aware of, anything that says if you are really, if you do better or worse, that it affects the amount of grant, your grant availability. There's a whole bunch of other things that, Nate's probably more familiar than I am, that affect your amount, your ability to get grants. One of the things is the overall amount of money that the state has in the grant budget. There's probably twice as many towns now competing for that grant, those grant dollars, than when we first started.
Mhm.
So the space that we have for grant money is less than it used to be, but and Nate will probably talk a little bit about some of the plans that we have for next year, actually. All right. So I'm going to keep moving. The next thing I want to show is over. It's a word, yes. Let me see if this. Wait a minute now.
Hey, Jim, before you leave this scene here, I must have missed this. What's that tiny little usage under open space?
Open space. Say that again. The what?
There's some very small numbers there, open space. What is using this juice?
I think what that is it's basically electrical use at the ball field, at the recreational facilities.
Okay, that seems very small for that.
It is very small, but it's MMBTUs, and how does that convert to kilowatt hours and so on?
Okay.
I'd have to pull
Okay.
that out. Okay. But there's no fuel consumption in that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and I want to see if I can go to my other. Let me try.
One more question.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
With respect to the buildings, do they include the ballpark buildings as well?
Oh yeah, every Lakeville account that buys fuel or electrical goes into this summary.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So the other part of the report that we spend a bit of time on is basically a how did we do, sort of a narrative. And the best summary I can give you of that is they asked for us to basically put a table together of our the 3 top, I've got the 4 top buildings in terms of BTU consumption, and also looking at it on a density standpoint, BTUs per square foot. Does everybody see this table now, by the way?
I guess not.
It's
Say
the
that
same,
again?
it's the same table.
Jim, you may need to unshare your screen and then reshare what you're
Okay,
trying to share now.
Thank you.
Yep.
Let me go to stop share. Let me go to share screen. I had a feeling that might be a problem, and I'll come here. Okay, now do you
There
see?
we go.
There we go.
Much better. Yep.
This is just an extract from about a 3 or 4 page Word document where with the input from all the departments, I put together a summary of how we did this year compared to past years, compared to the baseline year. So, and you really don't want to have to go through all of that, but this is a good summary of, we're specifically asked to look at our top 3 energy consumers, how they did versus the prior year. I picked 4. So it's nice to know. So AES, Assawamsett Elementary School, the town office building, the police station, and the library. Those are our biggest energy consumers. And by far, AES, okay, the elementary school, is by far the largest, and it's also by far the biggest consumer of energy, total energy. If you look at it on a square foot basis and compare it to the prior year, what we have is, it looks like we got 25% higher level of consumption on a per square foot basis. This was a particularly low year. And the other thing that happened, I don't even know if we have Nate still on, but I might pass this on to Brian anyway. On the, I think it was something like the 17th of April this year, the schools went around and filled all their tanks up with oil. It was really cheap. It was like $1.05 a gallon. So I think that economically it was probably a good thing to do, but it was a little bit unusual. It's a late fill. So something like 25,000 gallons of fuel oil didn't come to just Assawamsett Elementary School, but to all the buildings. But out of that, Assawamsett got another 4,000 or 5,000 gallons. If you sort of discount that, then 2020 falls in about where 2019, well, not quite as good, but a little bit, it's a lot closer. And if you look at past years, back into 2017, 2016 or so, they come up around this number anyway. All right, so little things like that can happen, but I thought that was kind of interesting. Town office building did quite a bit better compared to the two, compared to last year, 63 versus 76 on a per square foot basis. Police station, the 94 represents where we were in the former location. In terms of total, you can see the energy is less, the total energy is less, 509 versus 805. But on a per square foot basis, it's more. In the library, I put that in because it was kind of up there with, similar. So if you look at these 3 buildings, you can kind of see where it falls, the library falls. And it had a better year also in 2020. And a lot of that's because of activity.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things shift when we figure out what the new normal is.
Yeah. It turns out that the police station had pretty much a full year of operation. So I don't expect 2021 to be a whole lot different. But when I looked more closely, the first 2 months of the last fiscal year of July and August were a little bit lower in 2019 than they were in 2020. So we'll probably come up a bit there.
Gotcha.
Okay, any other questions? I mean, we don't really need to go through. Well, I will mention one thing. One of the things we were asked to do is try to make a judgment on where we want to put our emphasis in following years. And if I look at the biggest 3 consumers, there's not a whole lot. I mean, we've made a lot of improvements in the town office area. You don't see it so much in the last 2 years, but if I go back 5, 6 years, we're down significantly. You know, a lot of building envelope improvements have been made. We've upgraded and changed burners. They've been keeping the fire doors closed. We had new fire doors put in, garage doors there. And police, of course, it's brand new. It's about as efficient as it's going to be. And there isn't a whole lot more low-hanging fruit at Assawamsett. So the answer is we're going to have to go look at other areas. And I know Nate's got a plan for that. I'm not sure, Nate, if you're been able to stay with us here, if you want to make a few comments on where we'd like to put emphasis for grants for, well, that's actually that's a different agenda item, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
Okay, let me just finish and then you get me off, and then, so I've got one more. So I'm gonna move out of this one, and then I do want to talk about, I do need to talk about the latest that we just got on our review of the annual report. So this is really just a copy of the email. I'm not even sure, Brian, if you've had a chance to see this. I don't know if Brian's still on or not, but
Yep, I'm here.
oh, I'm sorry. Oh, there you go. Yeah. You may not have even had a chance to see this. I think I sent it out today. I think, Rick, you did because you responded back. So there were a couple of, call it what you want, discrepancies. They call them questions. They fall into two categories. Looking at criterion 3, we did have a data entry discrepancy. It was really my fault. Doesn't change things a whole lot, but I was a little embarrassed that I copied the number out of some very dense table. I should be used to dense tables, right, Joe?
Yes.
And I just copied the wrong number. And then the other one was that the question on something that was not a discrepancy, but I'll provide clarification. Okay. The area we're going to have to spend some time is fuel efficient vehicles. That's all criteria 4. Questions about the classification of the animal control vehicle. Is it emergency response or not? That puts it makes it either an exempt or non-exempt vehicle. Police vehicles, as an example, the cruisers are exempt from meeting high miles per gallon criteria. Okay, so we were being challenged on calling the animal control vehicle exempt. So between Nate and I, and Brian can get involved here, we can figure that out.
I mean, if I could offer 2 cents, Jim.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know if they have a specific definition on emergency response, but I mean, the ACO certainly responds to dog fights, dog bites on humans, animals hit by cars overnight. I mean, they are paged out 24/7 responding to such things.
Okay. And I know that Nate had expressed very similar comments. I think we can use that if we need to. The only thing I would say is that that vehicle that we're using now is a fairly new vehicle, and it pretty much meets the requirements of the. So in other words, if we sort of gave in and said, all right, we'll call it a non-exempt vehicle, then it would not have a problem with meeting the MPG requirements because it actually does meet them. Okay, but that is not true for. We picked up 3 pickup trucks for the highway department. And 2008, I tell you, when I was down there talking with Frank, Nate, when I looked at those vehicles, at least 1 or 2 of them, they looked like they were, I don't want to say brand new, but they looked in pretty good shape. So it looks like they may not meet the current guidelines for MPG. So I'm not quite sure how we're going to want to work that. I think we picked up those at auction at very, very reasonable prices. They look like very good vehicles. And, you know, if we miss it, it's only by 1 or 2 miles per gallon. So I think it was probably a good thing for the town. It's just that we need to figure out how we're going to want to, we may need to write some kind of a remediation or non-compliance letter.
What's the worst case? If,
Well, I tell you, what I need to do is, and I'll work this a little bit with Nate, and the MPG ratings that we reported were, I think, you know, a couple of units below what they should have been. Well, what they should have been in terms of the meeting the MPG requirements. The problem is that the MPG requirements are a table. It's in the EPA table, and it really depends on, you know, what your what kind of transmission you had, and also what kind of size engine and how many cylinders. That information I don't have. And if in fact turns out that they're on the I don't know, lower power side, then we may meet the requirements. So it's a little kind of details, and again, we just got this in Tuesday, so we're still working through that. But the final comment is we may have to reinforce the town policy. In fact, Brian, I again sent a very recent email to you in response to your email to me about looking at, and I appreciate you were able to dig up the our town policy. And I don't know if Don's still here. I don't see Don there, but well, actually, Joe,
Here.
oh yeah, I'm sorry. Were you on the committee from the very beginning when we were putting the whole plan together and going through meeting all, you know, setting up the as of right zoning and so on?
I'm not sure.
The only reason I ask is because I know I wasn't. And that's when we developed, and I'm passing this on to Brian a little bit, when we developed our town policy. If you look at it, it's dated back, I don't know, 2011 or 2012. And I know for me, I have no sort of background in that. And frankly, until the last 2 years, there was very little scrutiny on, you know, how we were classifying the vehicles and that kind of thing. So it appears to be sort of a recent area of emphasis on the part of DOER.
Jim, I think back in those years, they didn't advertise a yardstick. They didn't give us the guidance. I don't think that was the level of detail or focus that they had, and therefore we didn't have it.
I agree with you, Don, because because you're right. When I look back, I don't think it was there. We do have it now. It was just updated, well, you know, a year or so ago. And I mean, in answer to Brian's email question to me from earlier, yes, I think we need to revisit it. We need to look at our guidance versus the latest guidance. I'll take a look at, you know, putting together a first cut update of the town. The criteria is the town has to have its own guidance, and it needs to comply with the DOER Green Communities criteria for guidance. And if you look closely at it, ours probably needs to be updated, I think is kind of the bottom line.
Jim, I haven't had a chance to read your most recent email, but do you happen to know off the top of your head, do they give consideration to what a vehicle is being used for rather than just what the vehicle is? So where my mind is going, I mean, if DPW's intention is to throw a salter and a plow on the back of these pickup trucks, I mean, you're not going to get away with buying Ford Rangers for that kind of thing.
Or you're not going to get away from with getting a a 6-cylinder versus an 8-cylinder or something like that.
Yeah.
I can't answer that directly, Brian, but from reading what they have, I think they're kind of, they're being pretty tough on this. They really want the towns, if you transfer vehicles, you got to be careful with that. And, gee, we essentially transferred in vehicles from another town's department somehow.
Yeah.
And if we replaced vehicles that had lower MPG ratings than the ones that came in, then we might have an argument. But that's something I need to get more information on at this point.
And Jim, here's a question for you. Is there
Can I step right in a minute
Go ahead.
real quick?
Go ahead, Nate.
So back to, Brian's question, there's 2 exemptions on the vehicle efficiency policy, gross vehicle weight and then emergency use. So those are the 2 things that,
Right.
that they don't fall into. Jim was explaining too, when you take a vehicle that uses a lot of fuel and you replace it with a vehicle that makes less fuel, even though that vehicle may not meet the energy efficient policies for the vehicles, you're still allowed to do that. So that's what we're working through right now.
Right.
We replaced, perhaps we replaced a full-time truck at the highway department with a Ranger that, while it may not meet the requirements, it's less than what was used. That's acceptable. We just need to kind of find out what if these vehicles were replaced. I have a question as well, whether or not we can cite this as COVID related. I know the highway department, because they didn't want 2 people in one vehicle. That's why Franklin's push was to run to the auction. I think he paid $1,500 for those vehicles.
Yeah.
A piece, and then Georgie and Billy made them look like $1 million. So
Yeah, I could. Wow. Yeah.
we have a couple of those different things that we want to look at.
Okay.
The other thing, and Jim, you mentioned it. It's worth looking, circling back with Franklin, checking if it's a 6-cylinder, 8-cylinder, and what the actual miles per gallon are. I think that you're going to find this will probably be a moot point with all of those things we just discussed.
Yeah, I agree with that, Nate. I did find that table in the EPA guidelines, and there's 4 or 5 different classifications for a 4-door, vehicle of that size. And we just didn't go to that level of granularity with regard to cylinders and so on. So yeah, we may be okay there.
And Jim, here's the question I had. Is there any consideration on the part of DOER as to the number of miles in a year that these vehicles are used?
That's not anything that I see in terms of the data that we provide. Okay.
Because it seems to me if you have some third-hand vehicle, which gets terrible gas mileage, but it puts on maybe 1,000 miles a year, mostly towing a little trailer with a lawnmower to do some of the, public places in town. Okay, that's not doing any much damage as something that gets, twice the mileage, but you put 50,000 miles a year on it.
Well, no, I think you have to see. I can tell you that 'cause I've been to a couple of I'm on the advisory committee. There's not a whole lot of consideration for the kind of thing you're mentioning, Joe. Okay, because if it's just a matter of miles, you put miles on, you're going to use more energy, even though it's low miles, with a gas guzzler than with something else. So I think the answer is no. I'm not aware of anything in the guidance that would have consideration for miles, for low mile use.
Follow-up question for you, okay?
Yeah.
Since the entire automotive and vehicular world seems to be going electric, what considerations do they give if you have an all-electric vehicle?
Well, basically, the one, and again, I'm still kind of new at pulling this together, but what the guidance says is that all electric vehicles meet their requirements.
Okay, yeah.
I think as a blanket statement for right now. It could be that as more and more vehicles come online, maybe they'll be getting, even more scrutiny on those. But for right now, electric vehicles are are fine. Okay.
Even though they bump up our electric use, because they gotta be charged.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Okay, so, I mean, I'm happy to answer questions and so on, but I just, in the interest of, moving things along, anything else on, so we went over the, what we reported, and this is what came back with some issues. I think we'll be able to answer, several of them without much trouble, but there's going to have to be some focus on the fuel efficient vehicle policy.
And that's something, Brian, you can take back to the board, right?
Yes, that was a policy that the board voted originally in 2011 and modified in 2012. But I will certainly want to have what the suggestions are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Brian already dug this out and was ready to bring it, any recommendations that are, any recommended changes that are necessary. He'll be happy to bring them back to the board. So, and I think we probably are going to need to do an update. So, anything else?
Jim, this is Nate Darling. I just have one question about tracking data. I know with COVID-19, I'm hearing now that the schools, under the guidance of DPH, are leaving windows open. So, there's a big push again because of a public health concern that, windows are being kept open, and even in weather like this, to get fresh air in there. I'm wondering if you're hearing anything from DOER as far as, how we're going to normalize that, or if this is going to be a very, very difficult year to report.
I'm glad you brought that up. I haven't heard anything, but I haven't really been in touch. But certainly at the next advisory board meeting that I'll be at, I'll definitely bring that up and raise it. And who knows? My guess is they're trying to go through it right now and figure out, how to put a response together. But good point. Yeah. Yeah.
And I can vouch for that. One of my neighbor's kids sits right next to a window all day, open, and basically in a hat and coat during school.
Jeez. Yeah.
Maybe.
Oh, well.
Could do.
Okay. So Nate, is it anything if you have something specifically you'd like me to bring, up to the advisory board, we can talk about that. Yeah, I'd be happy to, do that.
Well, it's just going to be that, that particular scenario is going to skew the numbers, and I'm just wondering if they're prepared for that. The other thing, and it just back to the vehicles real quick, and mainly for Brian, is DOER does create or does have a vehicle list. So for each of the separate disciplines that they track and establish MPG ratings for, they take, I think it's at least 4, vehicles that meet that criteria. So it might be prudent that, each year during the capital expenditures process, when people are asking for vehicles, we just provide that list. If you're asking for a vehicle, this is what it has. I think after solve itself.
Yeah, I would concur with that because that's come up at the advisory board meetings. Yeah, we've got on that list, we know that there are, just say 4 or 5 that meet this criteria. Those are the ones you ought to be looking at.
Yep, exactly.
That feels like a great addition to the policy to make sure you're referring back to that list.
Yep, good idea. Yeah. Okay. Now I'm going to go to Stop Share here to our host. I think I'm all set.
All right.
Thank you for listening.
Now I just need to find, I dropped my papers here. Okay. So we'll go on to the next, which is any update on status for next year's crop of grants that are out there, Nate?
Yes, I'll just reiterate what we talked about at the last meeting. We're currently looking at the Ted Williams Camp Commissary for weatherization, Wi-Fi thermostats, LED lighting upgrades, Then we're looking at the animal shelter for weatherization, Wi-Fi, thermostats, in a heat recovery ventilation system. Because the nature of an animal shelter, you get your odors and dampness and whatnot. So we'd be looking at a heat recovery ventilation system. And then at our library, it would be just, because it's a newer building, we'd be just looking at LED upgrades for the parking lot lights. I don't know where it's going to land. I'm seeing some communications from DOER suggesting that there may be a transition to a revolving grant round. As alluded to earlier in this meeting, there's double, if not triple, the green communities across the Commonwealth from when we started. The grants are getting more and more competitive. They're limiting the grant awards by what you've got in the past. Last I checked, we're still eligible in 2021 for $200,000. I think that we can find that amount of work. After that, we'll only be eligible for $100,000 per grant round. And again, these are going to be cyclical. They won't be given out every year. They'll be, you do it, we'll see what's available. Maybe Acushnet gets one year, Middleborough, Lakeville. So they're going to get fewer and farther between. But that being said, Jim alluded to this, is we've got the bulk of our stuff done that would meet a criteria for a grant anyway. The big three, I don't see a lot left. And then we were really focusing our efforts on the school district, and we had a lot of projects identified there because of performance contracting. And I understand why they had to do it. They needed boilers. They didn't have the capital to do it. Performance contracting is a good way to, borrow, and then the debt payment is paid by the savings. So they're going to get all of the low-hanging fruit because that was what was needed to pay the debt schedule for the larger ticket items. So I think that, moving forward, now the district is off the table, we're going to have to start really nitpicking at some of these smaller projects. And then after that, if grant awards are still available and they're still looking at a 10-year return on investment, or they're considering changing over to life expectancy. So if you have if we're changing a boiler in the COA in 5 years, they might say that boiler is going to last 20 years. So that therefore, instead of being a 10-year return on investment, you're allowed a 20-year return on investment. That hasn't happened yet, but that's the direction they're going. The other option is, getting town funds in partially subsidizing the project. So right now, if we partially subsidize it, bring it down to a return on investment under 10 years, those would still be considered advantageous from a state level.
Okay.
So that's kind of where we are, with the grant work right now. I do have some monies in facilities that I was going to petition the Board of Selectmen to use, for a consultant to identify. I mean, we've identified the projects, but we have to identify the usage, the current usage, in comparison to the proposed usage, in order to write something into the 2021 grant round.
And just to put a little bit of numbers behind what Nate is describing, back in 2011, in Q3, in other words, January, February, March, at the Assawamsett School, we used 131,000 kilowatt hours. Okay, and then we started doing the grant work and talk about getting low-hanging fruit. Last year, it went from 131,000 down to 73,000.
Wow.
Almost in half. So significant, and we should try not to lose sight of that, even though, we're plateauing out a bit. And think of it, those gains stay with you year after year after year.
Jim, the one thing we don't know from that, though, is whether that savings from 131 to 70 something is due strictly to the improvements we made in the infrastructure, or if there's reduced usage.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, well, the thing is that, the year after 2011 was 128,000 versus 131.
And that also doesn't take the weather component into consideration either.
Correct. But, but the trend is pretty clear. I mean, you know, we had 73,000 in 2020. In 2019, we had 74,000 kilowatt hours. So when I look at even a 2-year period, the effect is still as dramatic. But okay.
And some of those savings are not just due to facilities changes, but also just changing people's ways of operating.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, bad habits, right. Is Seth Pickering still in the same role he played some years ago?
No, Seth is, he's with another department, another state. He's not with DOER anymore. No.
Oh, I'm thinking it might be useful to have a conversation with somebody like him to see if there are new ideas coming down the road from those folks about the kinds of things that we should be addressing, the kinds of projects we should be considering.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sure Lakeville's not the only town that has used up its low-hanging fruit.
No, but I can tell you that when I go to the advisory board meetings, most of a lot of the discussions around what they can do about towns that have been trying for years and they just can't seem to make any progress. So, I mean,
does that mean they leave money for us?
well, well, not necessarily, because you got a lot of new towns coming on that are submitting their applications, you know, for monies. Yeah. But the woman's name is Kate Sullivan. She's been very helpful for us. She works in out of the same office, I believe, although most of them are at home now. You know, it'd be a good question to raise with them. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Jim. I guess under new business, we have general question. Are there any needs that we see we need some budgetary support from the town to do? Recommendations.
I have nothing on that.
The only comment I would make is I've said this before. I'm not sure how much. I mean, I still spend a pretty good amount of time tracking the energy usage at the campus. Okay. And that includes electrical, and it's still kind of a nuisance getting building specific electrical information through those memo meters. Rick, you're familiar with that, and others are too, I think. He has to go around and read them and so on. And I'd sure like to get some kind of a more updated system that can, you know, where I can just go in online and find out over a certain period of time what the kilowatt hour uses are for the different buildings.
That's a good question for Sandy Richter at MG&E. We have these new meters coming in that are connected to the internet. And so maybe there's an opportunity to for us to access that data.
Yeah. Yeah. If they could replace those so-called memo meters with those others, then might be.
Give us access. Yeah.
Okay. I hadn't thought of that, Don. Yeah.
It's not something that they need, because they're metering it at the beginning.
At one point, that's right. But the same technology.
I don't think the schools are MG&E. They're NSTAR or.
No, they are. They are. The campus is MG&E. Yep.
They switched back a couple of years back, Don.
Yeah. I think there might be one light pole at the far end of the parking lot that's NSTAR, but. Okay.
That would be something, though, that we cannot do on our own. That's something that we need to get the school department to do, right?
I understand. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I mean, it would be to their benefit as well to be able to.
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Ryan, has your house been hooked up to a smart meter?
Yeah, they did it just yesterday afternoon.
Okay, I thought you just had it done. Can
Yep.
you access that information?
I've not received anything from them yet. So they sent around a little van that said meter service on it, and they did most of the homes on our street yesterday. So the guy just showed up, popped off the old one, popped the new one on. It was like maybe a 30, 45-second outage at most for us.
Really?
Yeah, even though they sent all of us pamphlets that said allow up to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
It was just as simple as him yanking the old one off and putting the new one on. And then he was out of here. So I don't know if we'll be getting something in the mail later, if they'll give us access to some kind of portal showing us our home usage on demand or not. But so
That's
far I haven't seen
exactly
anything.
what Jim wants. He wants to be able to access every individual use.
Yeah, you would think that it'd be possible for them to somehow either give you a portal to access them or just tag all the meters owned by Lakeville and do some kind of repetitive data export without a human involved.
Yeah, that's gonna, remember, this is a brand new system. I'm sure they're gonna have to work out a bunch of bugs.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
make
installing
sure that,
thousands of something new won't go easy in the first try.
So.
Jim, I think that's a question that you can take to your advisory committee. At some point, if the state is really interested in energy conservation to the point where they're giving us money, then they should also be interested in trying to work with the energy companies to make the data available to the folks who are doing the work. That's you.
yeah, remember though, the munis get different consideration than the investor-owned guys.
Yeah. Yep.
So they're, that may not play in your suggestion there, but I don't know. It's an internal thing. We should be able to figure out a way to spend 6, 7, 8 grand to get those meters more easily read. I don't think we really need to go to get state money for that.
No, I didn't mean to get state money. I meant that somebody should be talking to the state about convincing the power companies to provide access for the kinds of work that you're doing.
Well, but be careful. I'm not going around and all of the electrical usage that goes into this MEI database. Okay, that's not hand entered. Thank God. That all goes in as an upload from Sandy Richter to the DOER sponsored MEI utility. But the meter at the high school, which is what is the revenue meter, that information goes up, or at the campus, I mean. So that's not a problem. It's just that we can't break it down into the individual buildings at the campus.
Yeah, you need more granularity.
Right. Okay.
So, okay. And is there any other new business that anybody wants to bring up?
I've started researching something today based on a resident complaint. So we had a resident complain that a couple of streetlights were out, and I've quickly learned that we basically inherited a whole bunch of these things when we accepted 3 roads in town. So I'm still doing a little bit of digging, but I'd love to hear if the advisory board has in the past looked at these systems to say, hey, are these a worthy target for LED upgrades or anything else? I'm just doing initial number crunching now, but it looks like these 3 streets are around $5,000 to $6,000 a year in lighting currently.
Really?
And it sounds like they're known to fail over and over.
And do they have, are we sure that they are not LEDs already?
To my understanding, they're not, from talking to the DPW today. And I don't know if Nate's still available. He might be able to chime in as well.
Wow, okay. I thought that the town had pretty much completed converting street lighting, both town-owned and utility-owned, to LEDs.
So these are the ones along Kenneth Welch Drive, Riverside Drive, and Commercial Drive.
In the industrial parks, right?
Yes.
No, those are all LEDs, I'm quite sure.
Have they been converted already?
I'm pretty sure they have, yeah.
Okay.
In fact, if you look at the electrical consumption in something like 2 years ago, it dropped off dramatically.
Oh, okay. So
That
maybe it's
doesn't
old
mean
information.
I'm,
That was part of the plan.
yeah.
I gotta interrupt here because I'm dying laughing. The reason why, and I shouldn't be, probably the reason why they dropped off dramatically is because half of them aren't working. So
Brian, you said you learned that they've been failing. Are they breaking or are they being shot out?
Well, that I don't have that level of detail, but it sounds like it's been a combination of photocells, ballasts, the bulbs themselves, or the wiring. Once you start to rule it all out.
If they are not suffering from physical, misuse, then it sounds like you got a grounding problem that's causing them to fail prematurely.
I know when we first started the conversation about the LED lights in the industrial park, and this came from Sandy Richter, they were reluctant to do it because they were expensive and because they see a lot of street lights in isolated areas being shot out.
Right.
22s or BB guns or shotguns or something.
It wouldn't surprise me if there's some target practice going on, but I mean, if you take, Kenneth Welch Drive, it looks like over the last 13 months, and again, to Nate's point, I don't know how many lights are working versus non-working. The last 13 months, that was about $1,000 worth of energy. Let's see here. Well, 6,500 kilowatt hours. Commercial Drive was $2,700. Riverside was almost $1,900. But again, I don't know how many units that is actually functional. And we've got retail down there now, which we didn't have before. So you've got more people coming and going. Certainly during the winter hours, you've now got people coming and doing transactions at some of the businesses.
And the town is responsible for that?
Well, we own some, and then there's some that MG&E owns. We paid the bills for all of them.
Mhm.
yeah, so if I can step in if you want. So commercial Riverside, Kenneth Wells Drive, there are a mix of older style lighting fixtures and new LED ones. And what happens is there's a relation between vehicle takes one out. We had a sander take one out about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. Some of them are just gone. There's no pedestal left or anything. So as we're replacing them, with LED. If it's just a light bulb, they're changing the light bulb. We've been in conversation with Sandy Richter and Ed Rappold at MG&E. There are some availability of, they're buying in bulk, obviously. So, they're going out there with their trucks. They're doing the town a great service. They're working with our town electrician to get these things replaced. They're back charging their materials at cost for the town of Lakeville. And we are kind of working through these. But the last I checked, it was either 24 or 26 lights out in just Kenneth Welch Drive. We've never budgeted the right amount. Of course, we haven't seen the use that we've seen it now either. So, I've been talking to Brian. We're going to establish a plan. And I think the main reason he brought this up, because it might be something that we can either put into a competitive grant. There is also an $8,000 annual matching 50-50 matching grant that MG&E does. So if we allocate $8,000 this upcoming fiscal year, Middleborough G&E would most likely give us another $8,000 to do some of this work. So, essentially getting $16,000 worth of work done for $8,000. With energy efficient lighting. So we can, start working through that. I'm going to look into it a little bit more and, see what the best avenue to go would be.
And it's really interesting looking at some of the data I got from the invoice, which is if we look at just year to year, the most recent billing month I was given was October of this year. And for Kenneth Welch specifically, October of 2019, it's listed as using 180 kilowatt hours. However, if you go to October of 2020, it's listed as using 1,084, like tenfold.
Wow.
So I don't know what the difference there was, if they fixed a bunch of lights or what happened. Or if we're just warming the ground with a short somewhere.
I'm sure there's a little bit of that too. Don't walk your dog there.
Yeah, that happens in cities all the time. Dogs get zapped sidewalk.
So, did that cover your question there, Brian?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, if we touched on the smart meters earlier, I think it'd be really cool if MG&E wanted to come and do a dog and pony show for us a little later once they've got things ironed out, just to see the new capabilities they've got with all the new meters.
That'd be nice. That would be nice. And, you know, they were, you know, you see some of the comments on Facebook. There are some folks who were, you know, rattled by, oh, they're putting in new meters and they really don't understand why. And they don't like it because it's change. But it's change that's going to ultimately make life a whole lot better for all of us.
I like Brian's idea about an instruction. I think it should be a video that we put up on Lake Cam for everybody in town to see.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Just the idea of me not having to call them and say my house is out is nice for me.
Yeah, or sit there wondering,
Yeah.
somebody else call? Should I
Yeah.
call? Am I being a nuisance?
Yeah.
And then when they get when they get their call center totally flooded and when they don't answer, then we get angry because they're not answering. You ask how I might know. I know how it works.
Rick, do we have any more business? Otherwise, I
Yes, sir.
think I need to sign out for the day.
I think we're all done unless somebody else has anything in particular.
Do we have any minutes of a past meeting to look at? I haven't seen any.
I'm not sure. I'll have to check back with Tracy and see.
Okay,
And we'll cover that at the next meeting if that is the case.
speaking of next meeting,
Well,
as needed.
I think as needed would work. However, just to be able to not drift off into obscurity, to be able to say, let's look at a time frame mid-February or March and get back together because, you know, we want to stay abreast of what's going on.
Okay,
So I think it would be beneficial for Brian as well at that point.
yeah, I think between Jim and Brian and Nate, somebody's going to be getting information. Oh, we should be meeting because something is coming up. So that will create the urgency for the meeting.
Yeah, so I'm going to put a note on my calendar in mid-February to just bring up the question of, you know, do we have enough on our plate to warrant another meeting and get everybody up to speed? Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So with that concludes the list of stuff that we wanted to talk about today. Jim, thank you so much for your efforts in
Okay,
presenting all that stuff. Nate, you as well, thank you. And I guess that brings us to a close. So
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
Motion.
we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Bye.